Back on November 8th, 2016, the world was pretty much glued to their screens as Donald Trump, a real estate mogul and reality TV star, just completely defied all the odds to win the US presidency. So today, we're going to deconstruct exactly how that happened. We'll follow 4 key clues that honestly were hiding in plain sight for decades. In the early hours of November 9th, the entire political world was just reeling. Outlets like Politico weren't mincing words, calling it the biggest upset in the nation's history. This wasn't just another election night, it was a political earthquake that basically shattered every single prediction. All right, so that leads us to the big question, right? The one at the heart of this entire analysis. How did a candidate with zero prior political or military experience, someone known almost entirely for his business empire and TV fame, manage to win the highest office in the land? To figure that out, we have to go looking for clues that were right there in front of us for years. Okay, let's dive right in with our first clue, the personal brand. See, long before he was ever a politician, Donald Trump was a brand. That name was synonymous with wealth, success, and this really specific, aggressive style of doing business. And it was all forged in the high-stakes world of New York City real estate. It all started back in the 1970s. He took over his father's real estate business, but he shifted the focus from the outer boroughs to the cutthroat world of Manhattan. And projects like the Grand Hyatt in 1980, and of course the iconic Trump Tower in '82, they didn't just make him a lot of money. They made him a public figure, a symbol of ambition. But here's the thing, his brand wasn't just built with steel and glass. It was deliberately crafted. His 1987 bestseller, The Art of the Deal, really cemented this persona. It wasn't just a business book. It was basically a manifesto that painted him as the ultimate deal maker. The New Yorker called him an emblem of the successful tycoon. And that image, it would become a huge part of his political pitch almost 30 years later. Okay, so that's clue number 1. Let's move to our second clue and see how this all connects. This brand, forged in the business world, was about to get broadcast into millions of American homes every single week. His move from tycoon to television star was nothing short of a masterclass in media positioning. 2 words. That's all it took. You're fired. This catchphrase became a massive cultural phenomenon. It was, of course, the climax of his reality show, The Apprentice, and it perfectly captured the persona he'd been building for decades: decisive, powerful, and totally in control. And let's not underestimate the scale here, because it was staggering. At its peak, The Apprentice was pulling in over 20 million viewers. So for more than a decade, Trump wasn't just some businessman you saw on the news. He was a weekly fixture in the living rooms of a massive chunk of the country. The show very carefully created this specific character, America's boss. He wasn't just a tough guy. He was portrayed as this savvy mentor who was a master negotiator, someone who could walk into any high-pressure situation and get the best deal. That role gave him a kind of public credibility that most politicians spend their entire careers trying to build. And his biographer, Gwenda Blair, really nailed the long-term impact of this. She points out that this decade-long TV performance imprinted an image of him as this competent, authoritarian leader on millions of future voters. It was a perception built not on policy papers, but on primetime television. All right, so we've got the brand, we've got the TV persona. Now for clue number 3, the message. When he finally jumped into the political arena, he didn't run like a standard Republican at all. He ran on a populist platform that, in many ways, broke completely with conservative tradition. Just take a look at this. On a cornerstone issue like free trade, he was fiercely against deals like NAFTA, which many in his own party loved. And then, on the social safety net, he promised not to touch programs like Medicare and Social Security, another huge break from the party line. This allowed him to position himself as an outsider, fighting for the average person, not for the party establishment. And when you boil it all down, his message really came down to a simple, powerful promise. This quote from his announcement speech just captures it perfectly. He wasn't talking about complicated economic theories. He was talking directly about jobs. And that message hit home for voters who felt left behind. And of course, you can't talk about the message without the slogan that tied it all together: Make America Great Again. In just 4 words, it did 2 things brilliantly. It tapped into a sense of pessimism that many voters felt, while also offering this really hopeful, optimistic promise of getting back to something better. It was simple, memorable, and just incredibly powerful. So that brings us to our final clue, which I like to call the amplifier. Okay, so he had the brand and the message, but his victory really hinged on his unbelievable ability to dominate the media and speak directly to his audience, completely bypassing the traditional gatekeepers. I mean, just look at these numbers. By some estimates, Trump got the equivalent of $3 billion in free media coverage. His talent for creating news meant the cameras were always on him, giving him a massive advantage. He didn't have to buy the airtime. The news networks just gave it to him. And then there was Twitter. Before 2016, no candidate had ever used social media this way. Twitter became his personal broadcast station. It let him instantly react, attack opponents, and rally his base, all without any filter from the press. He wasn't just part of the news cycle. He was creating his own, 24/7. So, let's put all these clues together. A powerful brand, a famous TV persona, a populist message, and total media dominance. What does it all add up to? Well, it all came together to activate a very specific and very powerful group of voters, especially in America's industrial belt, what some started calling the forgotten voter. When you look at the research, a really clear picture emerges of his core supporters. They were often working-class white voters, many without college degrees, living in communities that had seen factories close and incomes fall. They felt like they were the invisible backbone of the country, completely ignored by politicians. And he spoke directly to that feeling. This quote from a speech he gave in Michigan is so telling. He wasn't just promising policies, he was promising them a victory. He framed his entire campaign as a movement for the factory workers and wage earners who felt like they hadn't had a champion in decades. You know, the way he talked was a huge part of this connection. What his critics called crude, a lot of his supporters saw as authentic, a rejection of a political correctness that they felt was silencing them. And above all, his relentless focus on jobs, jobs, jobs spoke directly to their biggest anxieties. So when you lay it all out like this, the path to victory becomes pretty clear. It's almost like a four-step formula. First, you have the foundation, that brand built over decades. Then, that was shaped into the persona of America's boss on TV. He used that platform to deliver a simple populist message. And finally, he amplified it nonstop by mastering both old and new media. And all of this leaves us with one final and really crucial question. The 2016 election wasn't just about one person. It was a seismic event that forces us to ask, in an age of reality TV and social media, what are the new rules of politics? And what does it mean when the lines between celebrity, the media, and the presidency blur completely? That's definitely something to think about.